So guys, I am joined by Matthew from MT Cycle Repairs. We've just made a video about bike maintenance and also what to look for if you're looking to buy a second-hand bike. Now we're going to talk about the fun stuff. Now we're going to talk about e-bikes, what type of frame to look for if you want to build your own e-bike, and what type of not after sale service, but what type of help can you expect to get online and from Matthew if you go into troubles once you're doing it, very much like me.
Yeah, so in regards to what type of bike dictates an e-bike, the great thing about doing it yourself is that you can pretty much do it to any bike, as long as there's not a large build-up of rust on it and there's no critical areas and joints that you feel that may fail. But most bikes, a lot of modern bikes, can easily deal with the torque and so forth that's going through that motor. Even older bikes with steel frames being a bit more supple can actually be a bit better.
Okay, you know my background is Deliveroo, so most of the people watching this will be thinking, what is a good bike, e-bike to build for Deliveroo?
So I would always look at your riding style, kind of what you want from the bike. A lot of delivery drivers will be in mostly riders, who say, sorry, not drivers, will be in a lot of urban areas. So things like suspension on the front, you don't need it. It's more of a personal preference. Really? I would say so, yeah. It's the comfort on a bike is more about your riding position, where you are on it. Your body will. One of the things that you have to get right is the sizings of the bikes. So you can get sizing charts, which is dictated by that point and that point on the frame, which will be a frame size. When you go to full suspensions, they have virtual frame sizes and it's a bit more complicated. But as long as you're not on a bike which is too big or too small, you won't be too far over the front or you won't be too overstretched.
Do you not think that the suspension helps with potholes and vibrations?
So if you have a hub motor on the front like I do, where you've got more weight on the front, then quite possibly yes. If you're on a bike which is more sit up and beg, or your weight is much further back, then you don't have a lot of weight on the front. And as long as you're actually having regular services on the bikes and the quality of the wheel is not a single wall, really cheap aluminium, soft as butter, going over that wheel on the regular service regularly will just keep it true and keep that spoke tension good. Unless you're an absolute maniac and really putting all your weight over that front end and smacking every single pothole. Yeah, a lot of urban bikes now don't actually have front suspension. A lot of them have a solid fork. It's to save weight and makes the bike easier to ride, really.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I must say, I specifically bought this bike because it had front suspension and it had the brake disc mounts.
Yeah, brake discs are incredibly important when it comes to an e-bike, especially when you're a delivery driver. If you're not going over 15-ish mile an hour, then V-brakes with a harder compound, yeah, okay. But when you're dealing with some slightly faster speeds, you are dealing with much harder braking, and you will just run through the V-brake pads like they're butter, basically, unless you have a much harder compound, and then your braking effect is not as good at all. So disc brakes, definitely a must, I would say. If you can have hydraulics, even better. It would deal better with adjusting themselves. Otherwise, if you have calipers which are a cable caliper, and it just...
So we can show the difference here now with yours. So what we have here is mechanical disc brakes.
My bad cable you want, there we are. Bless it.
And then as just to compare it, here we have the hydraulic disc brakes. As you can see, there's no lever here. It's all done with the hydraulic fluid.
Yeah. So the idea of that is when you have a hydraulic disc brake, you have the two pistons on each side, and as long as those pistons are regularly serviced in your service and cleaned, then when you pull that brake, they will both move in at the same time. Whereas with a cable brake, this piece is moving, this piece is not, and it's pushing that brake pad in only, and it's pushing it to the other brake pad. Now obviously both sides of the brake pads wear, and as it wears you're going to be pushing the actual rotor, the actual disc rotor itself here, you're actually going to be pushing that over more and more to that other pad, and that's going to warp it more, and when you go through heat cycles it just means that you're going to get more noise from it hitting the brake pads.
So where would you draw the line in the type of speeds that you wanted to do between hydraulic and mechanical discs?
So I wouldn't, anything more than, to be safe I would say anything more than 15, 90 mile an hour at the most, anything more than that I would be going with disc brakes.
But I mean like, yeah, okay. But I mean like hydraulical and mechanical.
It's mechanical and hydraulic. Hydraulic disc brakes are designed to be on cross-country bikes, downhill bikes, where they're really having a lot of braking force, a lot of heat cycles, and all weathers really through all those heat cycles. Whereas when you have a mechanical disc brake, it's more maintenance. It's just more maintenance. So the faster you're going, the harder you're braking, what type of brake compound you have to your disc brake pads as well, because you have organic, semi-metallic and metallic ones. There's different characteristics. So
Okay, so let's say that somebody was doing Deliveroo, they were traveling about 20 miles an hour as just an average. Should they go for the cheaper mechanical disc brakes, or should they go for the hydraulic?
if that person can afford to go for a hydraulic, I would always recommend to go for a hydraulic, because it's less maintenance.
Yeah.
They're designed to go through those heat cycles. They're designed to be having a lot of braking cycles during all weather conditions and off-road conditions.
And you mentioned about the pads as well. What would you recommend pads-wise?
So it's a bit more of a personal choice when it comes to pads. So organic compounds is a softer compound. They will give you more braking, more immediate, but they will wear quicker. Whereas if you're going at high speeds, metallic disc brake pads will wear a lot slower, but you have slightly less braking until they get hot, and then they work a bit better.
Okay, that's interesting.
So I have mechanical disc brakes, but I have metallic pads. So I balanced the two. Whereas I had the organic, I was adjusting my brakes every week, and I was commuting 20 miles 5 days a week, and then more on my days off. So it kind of gives you an idea of how much you need to keep on top of those brakes every week or two, compared to a hydraulic where you'll give it a bleed every 6 to 12 months and change the pads every 6 to 12 months, depending on what pads you're going for. So
Now, from speaking to the people that I work with, I know that frame failure is a real issue for e-bikes, whether it be the panniers breaking or literally the chainstays breaking. What would you say about the brand of frame that you would look for, or the quality of frame that you would look for?
yeah, so if you're looking at your materials, with aluminium, the technology has got better now. There is, how metals behave with aluminium, there's less movement in it as such, and the point of failure before it will move and then break, it will break a lot sooner rather than starting to crack as such. Carbon I just wouldn't even go near, because yeah, okay, you might get a creak and it might start cracking, but a lot of the time it will shatter, and still there's a lot more movement in it. Or even chromoly, chromoly will be lovely as an e-bike. It would be, yeah, that would be a bit of a dream. But so when you're looking at a frame, the problem is when you go to bike manufacturers, they put a weight down to the whole bike rather than just the frame as such. If you've got stays like this, which are got a bit more of a weave in it, then there's going to be a bit more movement in it. The biggest way to stop rear chain stays from breaking, I would say, is just to have that tyre pressure just a little bit lower, just to give that little bit of give. So tyre pressures will have a range where they can go from and to. So MTB tyres will normally be between 40 to 65, and road bikes will be anything up to 110 or even more in some cases.
I think I might have gone for 90. That might have been a mistake.
Yeah, no. Well, here's the ironic thing is that what actually holds the tyre on is the rim to the actual wheel. So you can actually go more as such, but if the quality of the rim isn't good enough, or the beading to the actual tyre isn't as good as it should be, then you risk having blowouts and things like that. But I would, a lot of riders, they find when they're on the bike for so much time as well, just having that little bit of give is.
But you're going to wear your tyres out quicker, right, by having a lower PSI?
You'll have more contact surface on the ground on the tyre, but you could argue the same the other way, whereas if you have less compound on the road, you are going to wear that compound more rather than spreading that load over the tyre as such.
So you're saying that I should reduce my PSI?
Possibly slightly. I can check it for you in a sec. Yeah, no worries at all. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is to make sure that you are not below the recommended specification, because if you are, you will then start doing things like putting cracks into the sidewalls of the tyres. So you can do things like having suspension in the seat post itself to take a little bit more of that give out. But if you're more over front end, then I would recommend front suspension. If you're more over the back end, then suspension in the seat post, just so where your weight is on the bike, which is the seat, if you're going over a bump, it will give in that section rather than being transmitted through the frame and then other components. So.
Okay. So I resisted building my own e-bike for a long time because I was just scared, to be honest. Would you recommend buying a kit, or would you recommend getting somebody to build a kit for you? Or what would you say about somebody who is considering it, and also in respect to batteries as well?
So there are positives and negatives from each side, really. You can do it cheap as possible, and have just a random brand Chinese kit, which then you have a Chinese battery, and you can do it for if you're doing it yourself, you can do it for as little as around £300 with a 500 watt motor, which will keep you going at 20 mile an hour for about 20 miles on that battery. Whereas if you spend a little bit more, you're getting a better controller, you're getting a better LCD, which just little things like the actual build quality itself is just going to be better. And if things do fail, like the LCD or the throttle, you're not forced to get another kit. So you can actually get the parts separately.
Okay, so what would be your minimum? Like, what would you say? Okay, today I want to order a kit. I want to go out and buy a second-hand bike. Tell me what would be your ideal bike, and what would be your kit, and what would be the battery that you would get?
So when it comes to the ideal bike, there'll be a string of questions that I'll be asking the customer to make sure they'll be get the right one.
In respect to Deliveroo.
So in respect to Deliveroo, I wouldn't be going near a full sus in any way. A full suspension bike. I do apologise. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, you've got a lot more weight, and if you've got a rear motor as well, some of the power that's being transmitted through is actually going into the frame.
That's an interesting point. Well, okay. Well, let's talk about it in my bike. What you think is good and what you think is bad.
So when we look at your bike, it's a Specialized. Now, Specialized are inherently great frames. They're nice and sturdy and solid. But if you look at the rear stays on this one, you can actually see when you go straight down them, the top stays are straight, and then the bottom stays, there's actually a little bit of a curve in it. And every single frame manufacturer will have a slightly different design to the frame. It'll have some slightly different give here and there.
Because I thought that was just cosmetic. I didn't realise that actually served a purpose.
Yeah, so the frame will actually move oh so slightly when it's going through load. So you've got that on the bottom, whereas if we look at mine, you can see that my bottom sections are actually a box section which is straight, and then my top stays has that bend in it.
Okay.
So that's where it's a bit more supple. And if we look at this strut here as well on those stays, you can see that it's straight. And then when we look at the stay on yours, you can see it's actually curved. And that is, again, to just make things a little bit more supple.
Okay.
And when you look at the frame, you can see that mine is a straight section, and you can see that yours is actually slightly curved.
And what are the pros and cons of the two different styles here?
So that will be slightly stiffer, whereas that will just give you a little bit more give. And now that is actually because Specialized have better frame designs when it comes to mountain bikes and off-roading compared to Carrera. I would say are a little bit more city orientated,
Okay.
whereas Specialized, you will have slightly more suppleness in the frame, especially when you're going over uneven ground bumps and so forth.
So for a heavier guy like me, would you say that the Specialized was a good idea?
It will help in terms of comfort. There's two things which I would say have a bigger influence towards your comfort, and that is your saddle and riding position. If you're not in, you can be on any bike you like, but if you're not in the right place on the saddle, you're going to know about it after about 20 minutes. You're going to know, because your body will naturally want to move to that position, and a saddle is designed for you to be in the right place.
What do you think that cycling bibs help?
Cycling
Bibs, the padded.
Oh yeah, sorry, the seat covers.
No, you can. Yeah, so it would be like a bit like a leotard, like lycra with padding in the.
Cycling shorts. Yes, sorry, yeah. So you could be wearing one of those, but then again, ultimately, if you're not in the right place on the saddle, it serves no purpose because you're inherently just not in the right place. Right. So there's a couple of things that you can do to make sure that you are in the right place on the saddle, which. Once you get your frame size right to you, again, you refer to your sizing charts depending on the make and model of the bike, which you can reference normally on most of their manufacturing websites. Is that when your frame size is right, is that when you're on the bike and you're putting the heel of your foot on the pedal, this knee should be in a straight line to your ankle. Right. If it's further backwards, you should need to move the saddle here on the rails itself. You can see it's clamped on rails. And the reason why it's on these rails on the front and the back is for you to move that forwards and backwards. Okay. So if your heel of your foot is on the pedal and you're too far backwards, the saddle should come forwards, and again, if it's too far forwards, it should come back. And that would get you in the right place for the saddle.
Do you offer a bike fitting service?
Yeah, so it's something that will be done in a normal service, and if you just want a basic bike fit to get you in the right place on the saddle, and things like putting a new stem on and having your bars just in the right position, it's just labour charge, which is about £5 to £10 to do that. You can pay about £100 or more to actually get a BG body fit to a bike, and that literally is measuring angles and things to make sure that you're in precisely the right place. But that is more for people like time trialists and so forth, which really want to get every single bit of power out their bike.
Okay, now what do you think about, okay, so what we have here is we have a front hub and we've got a rear hub with a single speed. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
So when you actually look at the price difference between a front hub and a rear hub, there isn't really any difference to the actual motor itself, but it will just dictate what you can and can't do. So for me, I went for a front hub I should say, because I have the trailer on the back, so I didn't want all my weight on the back. For a rear hub, what you have to bear in mind is they do supply you with these cogs, but they only supply that and they don't supply the chain as well. They only supply this section here normally with the actual...
Could you use an existing chain?
No. So a chain and these sets of gears wear together. If you replace one, you should replace the other. If you don't, you'll normally find that they will slip. You can normally, as I say, get away with not doing that 1, 2, maybe 3 times of changing the rear before you have to go through the front. But if you're changing one of those, you need to do the other.
So In respect to Deliveroo, what would you say is better, front or rear hub?
They both have different riding characteristics. If you had a bike without front suspension, I would say a hub on the front, just to balance that weight out. Whereas if you had no front suspension on the front and you were in quite a upright riding position, then having that weight further back is then going to have a negative effect on your handling characteristic.
So I've made a mistake then.
You've got the suspension on the front, you have a single speed. Because you've done single speed, it makes more sense. If you weren't going single speed, then I would say it was probably better go for a front hub, just because it would give you the gears if you needed them, and it would have cost less money. Because as much as we love e-bikes, at some point your battery's gonna run out. So.
What about the handling in the wet with a front hub?
So when it comes to handling, the only thing that you have to look out for is if you have more weight on the front, you can introduce things like speed wobble if you're not careful, which is what I found. But again, it depends on your riding position, the frame geometry, and how supple the frame is. Because when you put the weight on the front, you introduce, and I can actually show you, you introduce flex in the frame. If you look straight down the bike, you can actually see that flex. Yeah. So when you have that weight on the front, the frame will flex a bit more rather than having less weight on the front.
But what I was referring to is more like you've effectively got a front wheel drive car there.
Yes.
So when I've spoken to some of the people that I worked with, they've expressed concerns with the front wheel hubs in the wet when it's raining a lot.
So I found that there has been no negative effect in the wet from putting the power down unless I'm at a standstill, and only then. But that's as simple as just putting your weight slightly further forward or even just pedaling off rather than just letting the motor do all the work. A lot of the biggest thing that will actually affect your handling characteristics is actually more so your tyres.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, because not so long ago I read about the tread pattern isn't actually that important. It's about contact.
It's contact and compound to the tyre itself. So when you go to the road bike scene, they have something called a red chili compound, and it's a particular compound which is very well known. And it's incredibly grippy for when you're going around and going on corners, but it's I think it's a harder compound as well. I haven't looked at it for a few years, I'd have to double check, but the compound itself is very, very grippy and very, very light to the compound, I believe, and it's very well known. You have tyres which are actually designed for e-bikes.
Like
these ones are here, yeah. So you can see these are e-bike ready.
Yeah. But that just means it's certified, doesn't it?
Certified, yeah, up to 25 kilometres an hour on that one.
I think I read that Schwab, they only certified their most popular, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the ones which aren't as popular aren't certified for e-bikes. It's just that they haven't been tested.
So there are so many different tyres out there that it's more case of going through it and going, right, are you going to be riding on Pooley Road? Are you going to be wanting a wider tyre width to give you a slightly lower pressure but a bit more supple? Do you want to go for a thinner tyre and it to be harder and less supple?
What do you think about my tyre choice? Now, I went for Schwab Delta Cruise, which are very similar to the Marathon Plus, but I did it basically for the puncture protection.
Yeah, so in terms of the puncture protection, these ones, they have a belt in them as well. You can, for 10, 12 quid, you can actually get a puncture protection band that goes between the tube and the tyre. Yeah. Awesome. So Slime, the manufacturer Slime, used to do them about nearly 20 years ago, and they were very, very popular. But the problem is if you don't fit them right, they'll actually cut into the inner tube.
I can imagine they would be hard to fit.
Yeah, and if you don't keep up on top of your tyre pressures, again, they will cut into the inner tube. So it's one of those things that you just need to make sure you're keeping on top of your maintenance and pumping up your tyres every week. I say to my customers, ideally you don't want to be spending any less than about £40 on a tyre at retail.
I got both of mine for 38, but
That's not bad, that's not bad.
that was an eBay special.
So they are, to be honest, those tyres are normally about 45, 50 quid a pop.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Shelby's are not the cheapest because they've got the reflective sidewall on them as well, which makes a big difference actually, really, in the real world. It makes a big difference. But if you found that you were still getting punctures, I would say, okay, well, let's put a tube protector in there and let's just make sure we fit it right so it's got no sharp edges and keep on top of your tyre pressures. Ultimately, you could have the most expensive tyre in the world, but the sidewall to the tyre is actually not protected. So you could run over a branch with, or whatever, of thorns on it, and it could get caught and then puncture the side of your tyre.
Well, I mean, I had the Marathon Plus on my last bike, and I went for a piece of glass that was about that big, and I still got a puncture.
Yes, yeah. Some of them are harder compounds on the puncture protections, and then other ones are they've got more to them, and they're more of a gel. So, yeah.
What do you think about tyre width for Deliveroo? I went for 2-inch.
Yeah, I mean, if you're spending more time on the bike, the wider the tyres, the more comfortable they're going to be, the more supple they're going to be.
It is a really nice ride.
It will be, probably you're riding on pillows to an extent, basically, and the wider. So you see a lot of these fat boy bikes. Yeah. Now these fat boy bikes are actually originally designed and made for riding in snow, which is
sand, right?
Yeah, which is the reason why those tyres are so wide. But a lot of people now just ride them because they look good and they are. To be fair, if you had one of those on there, you would be riding. But the problem that you have, the negative effect to having a wider tyre is you have more rolling resistance. So.
Okay, well, as a last point, just before we go, and I want you to be brutally honest, I'm not going to take any offence, I want you to give me a bit of a review of my workmanship, what I should have done and what I did good and what I did bad.
Yeah, so I think actually yesterday you asked me what material you make your box out for your battery box. So this has been made out of wood. I don't know what type of wood.
MDF.
MDF, as you do. Spot on. To be honest, really good job actually for what you've done there. I don't know if you want me to open it up and to show off the internal. It's a bit of a mess at the moment.
You have to say that that's not how it would ordinarily look.
So to give you an idea, actually, you can see this has got a slide cover to it. And this is not a Chinese. Is it a Chinese battery? Was it the?
It's Sanyo, I think.
Yeah. So this battery has got just your 2 leads that come off it, rather than if we go over to mine's in a case, just a Velcro case. And if I actually unzip the side very quickly.
So I've got to say, even though the wiring looks a little bit messy on the outside of yours. Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah.
You can see that the battery case in there, the 2 terminals go off, and it's the same thing. It's just in a different case. It's just in a different holder, and you have just the polystyrene around it, which should be better stuff, really, to be honest with you.
Yeah, better than the protection on mine. Yeah. But what I was saying is, although the cables look a little bit messy, you're a little bit of a, what's his name, Colin Furs?
Yeah.
You're a bit of an inventor.
Indeed. My argument is, as long as it functions and works and is safe, which it is, then cosmetically, that's just down to me, really.
And I know that we're I was going to say, could we have a little test of the horn, but 1, it's a bit residential, and 2, I think you unplugged it, didn't you?
No, I can give that a quick go. That works pretty much no matter what.
This is the you're in the way horn, or you've done something stupid.
This is you're going to get hit, and I would suggest you move immediately. So yes.
So as we can see on the back here, it's basically a trumpet. And is that an air compressor?
Yeah, so that's just a compact 12-volt air compressor.
And then a DC-DC converter?
Yeah, so 48 volt step down to 12 volt, which true voltage is actually 52 point something down to 48 or down to 46, no, sorry, down to 12, sorry. But the battery will range from 52 point down to like 46 on the lowest charge, and it will still work. Even when battery's flat, there is actually still enough to power that horn.
Oh, okay, cool.
I can...
So if you were pedaling home and somebody got in your way, you could still hit it?
I can, yeah. And I can even have the LCD and everything turned off, and it will still work with me just putting regen into it. It will still...
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I had just my normal little one, which unfortunately only really is heard until you're on top of, but...
I love it. I really want one of those.
So I won't annoy the residents too much, but that's 150 decibels.
That really is cool. I would love to, you know what I would love to do? Just ride around with that and get people's reactions.
Yep. But as you were saying, obviously the wiring cosmetically is a little bit messy. It's a little bit more messy because I've just been using this one a little bit.
We diagnosed the problem with my bike, so that's why it's a bit messy.
But normally it would be thus so.
But it's all waterproof, right?
It's all waterproof. I mean, these are exposed, but I mean, that normally is covered up, to be honest with you. But if I just show you the terminal contacts, even when that's been exposed, you can see that.
Yeah, they're fine.
So.
Okay, so yeah, good things and bad things that I did about my bike.
So box design's actually been really well done.
Apart from the fact that MDF absorbs water.
Unless you varnish it enough and paint it enough.
Well, that's what I was doing with the vinyl cover, but it's going to take a bit of time to do.
Yeah, yeah. So every box design that you do, unless it's properly siliconed in or everything, ultimately you're still going to get a level of water as such, even if it's just moisture during weather conditions in there. As long as that water or moisture has a source to get out, so just a hole on the bottom for it to get out, and your vital electrical components are literally covered in silicone, which will just waterproof it full stop. Or even if, say, you have your controller, which was normally in a box, which is then siliconed and everything, even if you have that out the box, what I would probably do in that case is I would sit it in a small tub the same size, fill the tub with silicone, let it dry, and then cut the tub away from it, so the actual controller is literally...
It's a good idea, actually. I could do that based on the size of that hole, couldn't I?
You could, yeah. So the whole thing is actually sat in silicone, so there's actually no way.
So the silicone against the circuit board, it's not going to affect it?
No, so you just get so EB25, I think it is, from, say, Toolstation or Screwfix. There, you just have a silicone, which is a good rate silicone. That's what the manufacturers do on the seals. They use silicone around it.
It's really good to know. I wish I knew that before, actually. So what did I do badly?
The only thing I would say for yours is your chain tensioner is this one in particular. It doesn't have an adjustment on it to put more tension in the chain. So I believe you were saying that when you're riding, you found that it was slipping.
Yeah, going uphill it slips.
Yeah. So that's just because this you can't get more pressure on this.
Did you like the spacer I used next to the hub?
Well, a spacer is a spacer. You know, as long as it's thick enough and robust enough to not get swished and moved and so forth. I mean, if you look at my work here, you can see with my chain stays here, you can see I've done a spacer job as well. Just on this side maybe a bit more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was forced to do that. And ironically, a rack which is designed to take like a lot of weight, you can see here, with my signage normally on the back.
Yeah, quite a lot of people's racks are broken. And
this is the problem, the racks, when you're going at those types of speeds and you're hitting those types of bumps, ultimately there's going to be points of failure which they're not designed to take that kind of brutality, and they're not really designed to.
Now, you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but unofficially, what would you say about the law?
So the EU regulation, the requirement is that the controller is sold with a limiter on it. Anything over 19 mile an hour, you should be registered.
I thought it was 15.5.
19 mile an hour, I thought it was. It could be 19 kilometres, maybe. I could be thinking kilometres off the top of my head. But if you reference the regulations, every controller should be sold with 2 wires to plug in to limit it.
Okay, so if I had a 3,000 watt motor, it provided the controller was limited, would that still be okay?
So if you wanted to whiz past a police officer at 40 mile an hour and go, I'm really sorry my cable came unplugged, I'll just plug it back in now. Sorry about that, won't happen again, and be a good boy for a little while, then probably not. But the letter of the law is anything over that legal limit, you should have tax registered as effectively as a motorbike.
Because I thought that it was all pedal assist, no throttle. All throttles are illegal, and
Must have pedal assist. EU regulation again, must have pedal assist.
but you can't have throttle, can you?
You can have throttle with pedal assist, but it has to have a pedal assist.
I didn't know
It
that.
has to have a pedal assist.
Okay.
Or at least has to be sold with a pedal assist. What you do after that is...
Oh, okay. But the UK, okay, that might be the EU regulation on like manufacturer, yeah. But what about the UK law? Because I thought that was 15.5 miles an hour, pedal assist, throttles are illegal, and you can't have a motor bigger than 250 watts.
So as far as I understand it, it was, I might be thinking kilometres, but 15.5 with, has to have pedal assist, and if you have, you can have a twist on it, and if you go over that speed, then you have to register it the same as a motorbike, and you have to be wearing a full face helmet, the same as a motorbike, and have to have it registered. So I've not looked too much into that, because pretty much like every other e-bike rider out there just cruises along at 25, maybe quicker, depending on how you're feeling, you know, how much mileage you need to get out. But yeah, as long as you don't draw attention to yourself and spoil it for the others, don't go for red lights, then you're not going to make it worse for everyone else, because the more attention you draw to yourself, the amount of people that see this bike and go, oh, you're one of those riders, referencing to maybe Deliveroo and so forth. Unfortunately, if we create that stigma around e-bikes, then it's just going to have a negative effect for everyone. So it's all of us just being a bit responsible in terms of how we ride, just like any other road user really, and just be sensible.
Common sense and respect.
Yeah.
Although, strictly speaking, probably illegal.
Probably, yeah. No, if you're going over that speed, then unless it's registered as, say, a motorbike, then
Okay, and just well, yeah, long and complicated process, isn't it? But just as a last point, if somebody goes, well, I really want a kit as opposed to a shop-bought bike, I live in Reading, is there any way that I could buy these things, or you could buy them and you could fit it for me?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite at the point of having a stock of batteries yet, so, but in terms of getting everything easily sourced off eBay, I would literally just go through the questions. What do you want? How do you want to ride it? You know, how far do you want to go, and so forth. I'd be asking a lot of questions, and then based on that criteria, then I'll give a price from about $330 up, depending on what the rider wants from the e-bike, really.
So if somebody said to you, I've got a bike that will fit, it will fit the 26-inch wheels, which is pretty much the cheap standard, isn't it? Because the 20...
When you start getting bigger sizes, it becomes ridiculously more expensive. Yeah. When you get to 28s, it's just silly. Or 700Cs, depending on what you want to say.
So if they said, I've got the bike, I just need the battery and the motor in it to be fitted, what would you say? Let's say a 1,000 watt motor and either a 48 or a 52 amp battery. They said, can you give me a price, please, for the parts and to fit it?
So I would say you're looking at 380, and then for a 10 amp hour battery, because what dictates the price mostly is the battery.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The motor itself, a 1,000 watt motor, 48 volt, 52 volt, 48 volt, you're looking at £130. But when you're looking at your batteries, you're looking at anything from 180 up. And if that person doesn't want it in their frame and they want it on a rack, that can change the price. If they want it in a different place on their frame, they want a different design to the battery, that can. So it's really what the customer wants from the e-bike. But you're looking at about three.
Theoretically, somebody could come to you with their requirements and you could give them a price.
Most definitely, yeah.
Although it might be worth mentioning that you're based in Reading. You don't want people from London or anywhere outside of Reading messaging you saying, can you do this?
If they want to travel all the way down to Reading, they're very welcome to.
Right.
I mean, when I used to work in one of the top 10 bicycle shops in Oxford, Oxfordshire, back in Oxford, we had customers travelling from London because of the level of service that was given. So it doesn't matter if you're from London, doesn't matter if you're Reading, you'll still get the same level of customer service from myself. Or if you simply just want to message me and ask questions, it's one of those things. I'd rather you ask, just don't go silly with it. Just, don't send me 300 messages and expect me to be as polite as the first message, But yeah, it's fine. I'd rather, there are forums and so forth for that, but yeah, I'd rather.
Yeah, if it's like this is his business. So if you are a potential customer, then by all means message him. If it's just help, then it might be possible that a forum would be better. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for helping me with my bike. And I'm sure there's going to be contact details in the video. In the description, so if you do want to contact Matthew, then you've got all of the details here and they will be below. So thank you very much for your time.
The only thing I would say lastly is there's no such thing as a silly question.
I'm sure there are.
well you could argue that there is, but don't ever think that there is a silly question or whatever, just ask it.
Yeah, if you're in Reading or in the surrounding area, then by all means contact Matthew, and he will definitely hook you up. Okay, thank you very much.
Cheers, guys.